welcome to the Financial Pathway. I am Brandon Hovey, and I am joined today with my colleague, Tim Hedberg. Both of us work for Covenant Trust, and we want to thank you for joining us. During the next 5 episodes, Tim and I are going to be exploring financial planning topics such as debt, credit, retirement planning, investing, and giving. But today we want to cover 2 things. First, we want to step back and paint a big picture for personal finances. We're going to give you a model that's going to guide this entire series and help us understand how we can align our values with our money. Second, we're going to talk about developing a spending plan and give you some details on how to do that. But let's start with the big picture, what we call the financial pathway, which is a great tool and a great place to start. Tim, can you please tell us what the financial pathway is and how it works?
Sure, of course, Brandon. Thank you. So on your screen, you're going to see the whole financial pathway chart. And in the first box to the left in gray, you're going to notice the words money story. And this is where we begin. When we meet with people, I like to have them reflect back on the story of their finances. The way you and I handle money is influenced by people and events from our past, as well as by our current circumstances. These people, events, and present-day circumstances are factors in creating our money story. And Brandon, every single one of us has one. I like to help people think through the strengths of that money story and then the challenges of that money story. And then we want to empower them to write the next chapter, the next best chapter in that money story. Writing the next best chapter in their money story happens when they find alignment between their values and their purpose, mission, and call. So let's unpack this chart a little bit more. On the top of the chart, you'll notice the word values in orange. And on the bottom of the chart, you'll notice the words purpose, mission, and call. These provide the guardrails for the spending plan, the investment plan, the retirement plan, and the generosity plan. Values are those things that are important to you, those constant beliefs, those constant desires in your life. And purpose, mission, and call, again at the bottom of this chart, are all about living out your values or verbing your values. And purpose, mission, and call is about us responding to God as we seek to be great stewards of our lives.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Tim. I love this idea of creating a roadmap for financial lives, not just so we can have financial freedom, which is something important that we all want, but also so that we can align our values with our money. I think this is a concept that is not talked about very much in financial planning circles, but is very important to a lot of people. And this chart shows us, and I think encourages us, how to allow our values to drive our spending habits. And I'm curious, in your experience with financial advising, as you've met with different people, why do you think this concept of value-driven spending is important, and how have you seen that done?
Yeah, great question, Brandon. Thank you. So value-driven spending is important because our wallets are connected with our hearts. Jesus said, where our treasure is, there will your heart be also. The idea is that our spending habits and our financial lives are deeply personal. They reflect what we value, what we believe in, and why we live. And the financial pathway and value-driven spending is intentionally seeking to make our values explicit. It's a tool to live out what we believe. When I meet with clients, often they identify specific values when we're talking, and there are some examples on the chart that you're seeing. When a person identifies such values, they've identified the priorities for their spending plan, and they're making the decision to spend money on these values and to spend a lesser amount on other things. For example, a person might choose on this chart to give more to charity, to give maybe 1% more in this new year. And so when they're making that decision, they're eliminating the tendency to spend money on other things. One specific example was last year, a client talked about saving for retirement. That was a value that she had because her parents hadn't modeled this well for herself. And so in talking with me, we identified this value and we ended up setting up a Roth IRA for her so that she could have some retirement savings when she gets to be that age. You see, Brandon, when clients work with us, we believe that their values and their purpose, mission, and call should influence each of the stones on that pathway chart. And so, Brandon, today we're going to zoom in on that first stone, the spending plan stone on this chart. Brandon, as you think about writing the next chapter in Money Stories, how can we help people build a spending plan, and how is a spending plan helpful?
Yeah, well, in terms of how to craft a spending plan, how to create it, I usually suggest doing so in 3 steps. And so if you look on the screen here, you'll see these 3 steps. The first step aligns with what you just described. It involves identifying our values and asking questions like, what matters to me? What is important to me? And so what this means is if we're married, for instance, we sit down with our spouse and we begin to have a conversation over the course of a few hours of identifying and writing out what our values are. And once we're able to write those out, we can also write out what are some financial goals that are associated with those values, such as sending our kids to college, saving up for a big vacation for our anniversary, or perhaps purchasing a house in 5 years. We want to document all this. We want to write all this down. Once we do that, we can move to step number 2, which is to take stock. Take stock simply means tracking how much is coming in every month and how much is going out. So it's kind of like running a small business. We've got to know our cash flow. We've got to know our spending habits. And there's a couple ways of doing this. We can look backwards and kind of do an audit of our checkbook or online bank account and look where our money is going and categorize it into major categories like transportation, housing, debt. Or the preferable way of doing it is to write out a journal. And to categorize over the course of 1 month where our money is going. And once we have that data in front of us, once we know in a spreadsheet or on our website, you could download a free template in order to do this exercise, we have the information we need to see where our money is going and if it's reflected in our values, so we can make course corrections. And this really leads into step number 3, which is to write a spending plan. So this is the most important thing. After we know our values, after we know how much money we have coming in, how much we have going out, we can write a time-based budget that is either weekly or monthly, where we basically create a weekly allowance and we track those spending categories. And so we build out these spending ceilings or weekly allowance categories for major things like eating out, groceries, and gas. And I want to give you an example of what this looks like. So here on the screen, you'll see an example of a healthy spending plan. And according to this example, for instance, you see that this individual is spending 30% on housing, roughly 10% on transportation, et cetera, right down the line. Now, in a healthy spending plan, an individual or a family will be spending roughly 30% of their income on housing. Now, there's going to be some fluctuation there depending on what part of the country you live, but you want to make sure that when you purchase a house or that when you move into a place where you're renting, you don't become house poor. So that's one thing to take into consideration. 2, you want to make sure that your debt is healthy. So you don't want to be spending more than 20% of your take-home pay on debt. And if you are, you really need an aggressive plan and some specific tactics in order to tackle that debt. And then finally, as it pertains to savings, you want to save somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15% of what you make. This is for short-term goals, for long-term goals, for retirement. You want to be saving 10 to 15%. And if you don't have an emergency fund, you really need one of these in order to be prepared for surprises. So the big idea with creating a spending plan, with identifying our values, tracking where our money is going, and developing a game plan for our spending is that we need to have a plan in place. We don't want to just be guessing or spending our money impulsively late at night on Amazon. That leads to debt, it leads to stress, it leads to relational conflict. So instead, we want to draft a spending plan where we can periodically track it and adjust it as we go.
Yeah, Brendan, thank you. You mentioned real briefly emergencies, and these happen to each of us, and emergencies are emergencies. They happen suddenly and we're not expecting them. So how can we be prepared for them financially? What does saving for emergencies look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's one that a lot of people are asking right now, given the current climate. I want to share just a few statistics with you. First, there was a study that was done last year by the Federal Reserve where they found that 4 in 10 Americans would not be able to pay an unexpected bill, a surprise bill, without using a credit card. Another interesting statistic is that over 40 million people have filed for unemployment between January and May of 2020. So as we all know, the COVID crisis has led to massive amounts of unemployment. A lot of people have been temporarily or permanently laid off, and they find themselves in this difficult situation where they still have to pay their bills, but they don't have money coming in. And so this is where an emergency fund springs into action. This is where we've got to have a rainy day fund or emergency fund in order to be prepared for the unexpected. And so the best way to do this is to get roughly 3 to 6 months of bare bones living expenses in a bank account that is liquid, that is easily accessible. We put this money perhaps in a money market fund or a high yield savings fund, and we essentially leave it there for situations where we lose our job, where our transmission blows, where unexpected expenses come. And we would say that as you are building a spending plan, as you are getting your financial house in order, creating this emergency fund of 3 to 6 months in the bank should be priority number one.
Thank you. That's helpful. So as we come to a close today, we've talked about this financial pathway, and in that we've talked about values and money stories and purpose, mission, and call. And we're just beginning to scratch the surface on these things. Brandon talked about developing a spending plan and budgets. If you want to take a next step, you can go to our website, covenanttrust.com, and there you can find templates for budgets. You also can set up a time to meet with a financial services representative where he or she will meet with you to talk through your money story. Or thirdly, you can schedule a presentation where one of us will come and meet with your group to talk about such things. And if you want to learn even more, Covenant Trust has a YouTube channel with other presentations, and soon Brandon and I will have other episodes focusing on the other stones in the financial pathway chart. So in conclusion, we want to thank you. Thank you for joining us today, and we wish you God's blessings on your life. Thank you.